All right, everybody. How we all doing? It is noon on a Sunday. Oh, I know everybody in here has lots that they're doing throughout the week. I know that so many people have full-time jobs that they're stressing about, children at home, family members harping about what time you're coming home for Thanksgiving. It's just a lot. So I promise that we're going to keep this light, keep this interesting, keep this inspiring so that you can really kind of find your own grounding in writing immersive work, specifically for Fringe, but just in general. These people have amazing insight. All of you have done Fringe more than once. All of you have done incredibly complicated shows with an incredibly complicated model. And so I'm super excited to get into it. I'm going to pull up really quickly my questions because I didn't do that beforehand. And now I did. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the land that we're on. We're on the unceded lands of the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielinos, and Gabrielinos peoples. This statement serves as a practice as we, as Hollywood Fringe, commits to furthering our connection with Indigenous communities past, present, and emerging. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and honors the Indigenous peoples who this land was taken from. If you want to learn more about why we do this statement, what land you're on, or anything like that, you can go to hollywoodfringe.org/land, and we have some information there. All right, quick introductions to things. This panel is going to dive into immersive works, the creation that goes into them, and what it takes to present an immersive show at Hollywood Fringe. I'm Ellen. I'm one of the co-executive directors. Lois is my other half in lots of ways, and she's running around here. And then we also have Roddy, our artist services manager. And we are the people that work year-round at Fringe to make this happen. Thank you. We couldn't do it without our amazing venue partners who literally make this festival so beautiful. We have such amazing community members, and so thank you for Eastwood for hosting us today. But we have so many venues. Please keep in contact with us. We'll be kind of diving into that venue process later on. Today it's going to be more about like, what does it take to do things in this time right now where it's just where you're just imagining, you're just playing, you're making connections as to what kind of space you need, that sort of thing. My pronouns are she, they, and a quick visual description for those of us who are joining in digitally or for those of us who might not be able to see clearly. I am a white woman. I have brown hair and bangs. I'm wearing a red jumpsuit. And we have a hot stage behind us. It is a beautiful honeycomb shape in a traditional black box theater. And I would love if you all could just introduce yourselves. Also do a visual description. You don't have to talk into this little microphone. You can talk into that one. So that's your mic. And so if you could give, again, your name, your pronouns, a visual description. I already described the stage, so just yourself, as well as how many years you've done Fringe and maybe some of the shows that you've done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nick Rheinwald-Jones, he, him. I am co-artistic director of Spy Brunch. We did the show The Pod 5 years ago at Fringe, and I helped Katelyn out a little bit with her show last year, or this year, Murder, Blood, Bear, Stripe Part 2. And we do a lot of other immersive work outside of Fringe as well. Visual description, I'm a white man with gray facial hair and a salmon-colored shirt.
Hello, everybody. My name is Katelyn Schiller, and I've done Fringe since I think I started in 2015. I am a white lady person. My pronouns are whatever you want them to be. I have short curly hair, and I'm wearing a yummy bumblebee coat. Yes. In terms of things I've done at Fringe, I've done a little bit of everything. I've done solo shows and ensemble shows, but I have been focusing more on immersive in the past few years because that's just where the energy has been for people coming in and learning about the theater community. So
I have to give like a little anecdote before we jump into Kristen, but I took my my grandmother-in-law to one of your shows in like 2016, and there was this like beautiful interactive element where we were throwing toilet paper, and and this wonderful person threw it to her, and it hit her in the head, And she brought that up for years afterwards. It was one of these experiences where it was like this beautiful accident that could have, that she's an old lady and it could have gone wrong, but because you had planned so well that it was just toilet paper. It was just like these like light things. She was like, "Oh my gosh, remember when theater interacted with me?"
We were using toilet paper to explain the length of a solar system. So we were throwing it in the audience. So it was very soft. But I'm glad that she so memorable.
I just have to say that was one of those moments at Fringe where you're just like, oh my goodness, like this is such a fringy thing to be happening.
Yeah.
And she brought it up as for so long as like, what a interactive moment in theater. Like she had never experienced anything interactive, and so even that light element in that show really spoke to her.
That's awesome.
And then one lawsuit later, your grandmother now owns Fringe, so we really appreciate that she keeps it alive for all of us.
And then Kristen, wow, you've had a long-spanning career in Fringe.
In my brain, I'm like, what should I share?
Yeah.
So I'm Kristen Boulé. I know a few of you out in the audience. I currently am a freelance producer right now, professionally. I'm working with client-facing, experiential type projects, which is all the rage right now. I highly encourage looking into that world professionally. It's how you can make some money doing this stuff. I produced for Fever for a couple of years. My biggest things you would know that I did with them were the Beetlejuice project that was just closed at Ovation Hollywood, and I produced a really cool John Wick project in New York last summer to promote the Continental TV series with Peacock. With Fringe, I did my first Fringe was actually 2012, but not producing. I directed, and I've been producing almost every single Fringe since 2015. Also, I've done close to 24 Fringe shows, produced a lot of solo shows. We used to do a lot of musicals, a lot of site-specific musical stuff, and then we did a lot of immersive things starting in 2018. My shows were all best in immersive Fringe winners were Unreal City, Vote for Murder, the Gatsby Chapter 1 experience, Welcome to East Egg, and also Welcome to the Neighborhood. And then I am also a white woman with also dark hair, no bangs, and I'm wearing a camel shirt and black pants.
I just am super excited because sometimes I do these panels and I've only seen one show that these folks have done, but I've seen a lot of each of your guys' work. And I think one thing I want to start out with before we dive a little bit deeper into that kind of thing is a hot take. And my hot take is, what is immersive theater and how is it different than something like site-specific or interactive? And what do each of these kinds of terms mean to you? It's very personal. And also there's kind of some industry standards for what people are talking about. So let's blend that personal hot take with what you would kind of consider to be immersive, site-specific, or interactive works and kind of the differences between them.
I can run with it. For me, the big universal definition of immersive theater, I'm curious what you guys think, is audience agency. There needs to be some form of audience agency where you as an audience member are making choices that determine how you experience the show. Whether it's direct engagement with actors and with the experience, or whether it's being able to choose to watch peripherally and not be that engaged. An audience member should always have full agency to determine how they're gonna experience that. There's a big gray area, obviously, with immersive and where that line draws, and a lot of things that aren't necessarily immersive, where you're choosing where the story changes or you're choosing what path or whatever, but you still can choose to experience it from over here in the deep part of the room, or you can choose to experience it more in the world. So as long as there's some variation on audience agency, I feel like it's legit immersive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more than breaking the fourth wall. It's bringing the audience in and making them a part of the story. And that takes a different type of narrative thinking. And I think a hot take for me is I use a lot of inspiration from, and we've talked about this a bunch, from video game design, because the main character is you're immersed and you're telling a story in a direction that they can explore and make choices and have consequences. They're a part of it.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what immersive is from the creator perspective and how to sort of explain that to other people who create it or want to create it. And I think for me, the essence is that they're unlike any form of traditional theater or entertainment, like there are no assumptions coming in. So what that means is, if we're talking about this being like a traditional play that you would be seeing in this space, if I was the playwright, I would have to script everything that was happening on the stage. I wouldn't have to script you all in the seats. But if this was an immersive show, I have to script everything that you're doing as well, because you're not going to come in and say, oh, I know what to do, I'm going to sit down in a seat. I have to script everything that you're doing from the moment you arrive, even from the moment that you buy a ticket. And so that's a lot of effort on the creator part, but it's also a lot of power, it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of freedom. And so it's basically just like, how am I scripting this entire experience for you, including, if we're talking about audience agencies, scripting sort of, zones, however big they might be, that you have flexibility to make your own choices.
And I know that you all have this like big production, immersive type work that you've done where you have these different rooms, you have these different characters and roles and interactions. But I know that you all have other shows that you've done that have been like lightly interactive or site specific. Could we kind of define some of those things for people as well that might be new to the scene?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, site specific, I guess, it can come in a lot of forms, but I think, any show that is like really tailored to the place that it's in, that it's not just like, okay, well, we wrote a play and we can put it up in any theater. It's like the first show that Katelyn and I did together was called Safe House 77, and we built it around it taking place in this house in Los Feliz, and it was all scripted specifically to those rooms that were in the house and how people would move through them and what would be in them and everything. And so there, again, taking what I said before, there were no assumptions. It was like, okay, well, this is the place that we're doing in. So whatever story, whatever experience we're designing is all going to be molded to this specific place, these specific areas and everything. But it doesn't have to be that. I think site-specific theater can also be you come up with an idea and then you find whatever place you're able to do it in, whether it's, your first choice or your last choice. We've, Katelyn and I have both done this 48-hour immersive invitational before too, where you are just assigned a space and you have to come up with something that fits in it.
Make it work.
And that's a lot of fun too. But ultimately it's just like, whatever final creative decisions you're making are going to be specifically about the place you're doing it in.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about site specific is it doesn't have to be an immersive show too. Like you can go to site specific places. Like there was a show last year that was a little interactive, a little immersive, that was done in a van because it was about people experiencing homelessness or the formerly unhoused populations, and so they were able to kind of expand out their story and expand out that experience by kind of having you in that experience of being outside. It's hot. You don't have water. You don't have these sorts of things that we get to have in a traditional space, but it might have been more traditional theater. And then you also have like interactive moments that people can have within traditional black box theater. Like we were talking about with the toilet paper that kind of got to give this whole context to it was a musical that you were doing that year, or was it? I can't remember what that.
It was about physics.
It was about physics. I'm so sorry. When you have seen like a million shows in a year, you just are like, I can't remember exactly the things, but I remember these moments. And that would be like more interactive. And I think a lot of people kind of mix up these three because they're all non-traditional. And I do think that people tend to register kind of all three under our immersive category. But it's something to note on your project page to maybe talk about what to expect, because people might say I'm immersive and then somebody goes to the show and they're like, I don't feel like this is immersive for me, And so being very specific in how you register and how you kind of promote it, depending on what parts of this you want to do, because you might be like, I'm excited to write deeper immersive work or deeper site specific work in the future, but it's a little bit much for me right now. You can still be interactive, have these elements and start to kind of dip your toes in, but just be careful about how you market it. I want to dive in now to like some more deeper immersive stuff. I want to talk really about these like interwoven interstitial stories that you have all told in, or you've all told in. Oh my God. That you've all told on these stages.
Turled.
That you all turled later. But I really think that it is this like really amazing experience. You did a site specific work, or an immersive work that was just the pod. How many actors were in that?
I'm technically 3.
Yeah.
But mostly one.
But mostly,
Mostly Katelyn.
mostly, but it's just one audience member.
And how did that work for you? And then I want to hear more about your bigger
I knew you were going to jump to that.
But how did that work for you as just like the kind of one person with these interactive characters? Like, could you tell us more about the world, I guess, that you were building?
Yeah, so the pod was we wanted to create the sense, this was before AI, so people didn't know what AI was capable of. And so we were able to take a really imaginative but very science-based approach to our planet. The premise was our planet is dying. We need to send somebody to an exoplanet. 20,000 light years away? I think my dad is an astrophysicist. He helped me do the research. So we made this whole show where we need to send somebody, but we only have enough resources because you can only put so much on a ship when you send it out deep space, only enough for one person. And so we were like, so you're not lonely, so you don't want to die out there. We've created this AI personality that is going to learn and grow and go on this mission with you. But in order to go on this journey, we need you to come in and test her out, see how she's doing, if she's going to support you emotionally on this journey. And if, you're a good candidate to save humanity, but it was really, but from a Fringe perspective, doing one person audience members, I wouldn't recommend it, for Fringe, just because I think, you just can't get a lot of audience members, but the people that we did get in were like, fantastic. But I don't regret it.
I couldn't see it because it was so sold out.
Yeah,
I
it was
never
so
saw it. I was so sad I never saw it.
Sold out like immediately. Like you had so much. It was so hard to see it. I didn't see it either.
But we tried to. But knowing we wanted to get through as many people as possible, we tried to make it in 20 minutes. It was only 20 minutes long, and so you had to account for the onboarding. You had to account for like who you are coming into the story. What is your role? What is your purpose? You're going to work with this AI, and you're going to give us feedback. But while you were in there, and we did it over at Thymele, and they had this space that had a little closet, and that's where we made our pod. So because
it was a simulation, it was meant to be like,
thank you.
You're going through a simulation of your whole journey with this AI companion, and she is programmed to think that the journey is real.
Yes.
So you're basically kind of like speed running through this thing where, it's like these vignettes where you sort of get a taste of the scene, and then lights fade out, lights come up, it's 3 years later, and you're in this scene, and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah. But also just that's my favorite part about immersive is crossing over and connecting with that person. And when it's just one person you have to focus on, and it's them and what their impulses are, it's just unbelievably rewarding to give that amount of attention and love and dedication to what they are experiencing and what they want to give back. And that's what I love, is how much audience members would give back. But trying to do it in 20 minutes, and we would do, I don't know how many shows a day, but it just became muscle memory. And it's so, I love that show. I love it so much. Did I answer your question?
You answered my question perfectly. And I want to hear the exact opposite of a small, intimate show. Let's talk about this crazy big works that you've done, Kristen.
I don't know how to do one small shows like that. And I do want to tag on just a quick, it's hard to get audience in for that, but I also super advocate doing small shows if it's something you want to scale beyond the Fringe. Because the problem with what I create is it's very hard to scale because it's so many people. And even if you're looking at budgets and how much it costs to keep these shows going, if you only have 2 or 3 actors, it's much easier. And it's hard to find the formula. You need more audience than one person. But if you can create shows that have just a couple of people, the less actors, the more scalable it becomes if you want it to have a longer life. So
you can always hire your friend later. And that's what's cool, is making it really intimate so that you can expand that out with people you trust and build more trust with a couple of people versus 20. but it's cool too. It was cool to go into a 20-person cast.
Big cast. Well, Unreal City was 25. Unreal City was 25 actors.
How many sites?
19 locations.
Wow.
all around Theater Row, indoor, outdoor. It was a traveling show, obviously. And that it was insane. That was our first immersive show that we did. But my creative partner had just come back from Royal Central at London, and like, so she was this immersive, like, it was when immersive was much, especially in the States and in LA, it was a much newer thing. It wasn't being stamped on, every project like Lois was talking about before. So we went super ambitious. So we devised the entire thing it was based on the works of T.S. Eliot, the Wasteland primarily, but then other pieces, some Shakespeare in there as well. And so our concept was similar, like transport kind of thing, was that we started 3 clubs. 3 clubs was our like check-in spot, and it was groups of, I think it was like 35 people an audience. So we also looped. It was a 75-minute experience, but halfway through, a new group started. So, oh my gosh, this thing was crazy. Yeah. So there were seven phases in the show. You wouldn't know that as an audience, but to the actor and to us, the mechanics had 7 phases. And so as the actors couldn't be in every phase because of how the thing jumped around. So you would be in like phases 2, 4, and 6, and so you'd do like phase 4 with one audience, and then phase 2 with a different audience, and then phase 6 with that original audience. It was like that. It was crazy for actors, and some of them were very easy with where they had a room or a place where they were, and others were literally like poor Kevin Herman, who was literally, all up and down Theater Row, back and forth constantly, and he was in a huge fight scene. So we had oh my gosh, I don't really know what to tell you. I have to say about this.
My favorite moment was I was in one of these, and I was with this really incredible actor, and the actor handled this so well. But we were in a bar. We were in what used to be Black. Yeah. And this very drunk gentleman was like, "What is this?" Like, kept trying to interrupt us, and we were like, "It's a show. It's a show." You can't get that if you're just drunk at a bar. Like, this guy had no way of knowing that context. And the actors that you hired were so smart, because she kept character the whole time while also like interacting with this person, and like it was like it brought him along on the journey, while also like not making it as a ticket buy or feel awkward or awful that this person was getting the experience that it was cool. And I think that's you put so much trust in your actors in that moment.
Yeah, so I mean, the very brief concept of that show was that you were being taken to the future to see what would happen if you weren't to initiate change. So this is what's going to happen to us, and this is, in 2018, little did we know, but this was the idea of this is what's going to happen to the world, the wasteland, if you don't take action for what's right and be a part of your community, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the overall kind of concept of it. And so on that walk, we used Vine Street Elementary School was one of our locations. And so after 3 clubs, you were led, and on that walk, I'll try to like pepper in like how to build immersive. So like rules of the world are very important. You always want your beginning of your show needs to incorporate the rules of the world to your audience, whatever that means. Whatever that means. It could mean a million different things. If it could be as simple as don't touch the actors, don't talk, like you always need to say those things. I highly recommend, waivers ahead of time that tell them what they're getting into, because everything's different, and people might come in meaning well and then completely behave not how you want them to behave. So whatever the rules of the world are very important to establish in the first section of your experience. A video is a good way to do that sometimes. I have a pre-recorded thing that brings them into the world while they're waiting to enter. Again, it totally depends what the show is. But then when they got to Vine Street, when they got to the school, they were taken into an elevator, and that's when they stopped the elevator, and that's where they're like, okay, this is what's really going on. And then they let you out of the elevator, and you met, if you're familiar with the Wasteland, the 4 Hollow Men. And there was this big scene with all 4 of them, and then you as the audience got to choose who to follow at the end of that scene. And so that thus started your experience. And then there were, again, a million locations. You could get picked up by a car. There was a scene in a car where you got taken by an Uber driver. Only 2 people in every show got picked for that. And they would get taken to this alley over behind Black. And there was this alley scene with we did this sexual scene in an alleyway where you were like voyeuristic watching, and like there was a huge fight scene in the stairwell over by where we used La La Land space for a fortune teller. The stairwell's behind there, where we had a big fight scene with this law enforcement character who was being abusive to one of the community folks, and then. So anyway, so there was so many different scenes and things you could experience, but part of how to speak to like the actor part of it, we spend So we spend months like devising these things with these actors, and there's not every show is like that. But for this particular show, it was all scripted, but we built that script entirely with the actors. So like my partner and I, Tiffany, would create like kind of bases for the content that we wanted that each character would work with, the sections, whatever, and then she is the dramaturg. She would work with them on building the actual scene and the text and like what made sense for their character, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would, and I'm always the director, would take them and stage everything out into the world. All our rehearsals are outdoors. We literally remember rehearsing in the closet, in the utility closet at the Hudson Theaters, because two pairs of actors, their scene was literally in a closet. They'd pull one or two people in a night that got to see the scenes, little Easter egg scenes that very few people get to see. So rehearsal space can be all over the place. It's a huge also bonus to your budget when you can rehearse outside and in the real world. That really helps. But yeah, we spend a lot of time on something like that, devising and making sure that those people often say like, oh, it's improv. For me, there's a huge difference between improv and immersive. Improv skills are super helpful and very important, and there is a lot of that. But in improv, you're like often trying to be wacky, trying to be shocking, trying to come up with something that's completely surprising and out of the blue. Versus immersive, like Ellen kind of just said, you should be so connected with the world and with your character that you can handle anything. Kind of speaking back to what you were saying earlier, just in the very first question, immersive, what I tell, my actors when we work on this, immersive is no longer, it's not for everyone, let me say that, for actors. I know some fabulous actors who hate doing immersive theater. And they are not suited for it. It stresses them out. It's terrible. Because as an immersive actor, it's no longer about, and obviously actors work very differently, but you can't be about losing yourself in that role and just completely what you have to split your brain between actor and kind of stage manager, because the audience experience becomes the most important thing. It's no longer about the script. It's not about the performance. It's about the guest experience. And so even when you're doing your thing, you need to be super aware of what the audience, and can mean a million different things depending on what the show is, but you need to be able to be very aware on what you're doing, but also what everyone else is doing, so that you can ensure you're engaging them properly, that they're, whatever needs to happen to them is happening. But then, so I'll jump. Sorry if I'm talking too much.
No,
We'll jump
you're not.
Please, this is gold. This is all liquid gold.
We'll jump. So the next show we did was called Vote for Murder, which every show that we've done at the Fringe has been completely different format and different type of immersive theater. That one was very dark ride style, where the show didn't change. So in Unreal City, the scenes were always the same. The show didn't change, but you had to experience it over a dozen times to even possibly see everything and experience everything and make those choices to go through different paths. Vote for Murder we did was RPG, was much more game oriented and mostly unscripted, and that was based.
Could you define RPG for people?
A role playing game. So that's more where you as the audience are really playing a part in that show, versus Unreal City, it's very engaging because it's very small groups and you're moving around, but you don't have to you can just follow your path and go with it. You're not going to talk, you're not going to do stuff. Vote for Murder, it was up to you to solve the murder, right?
Very Clue-like, right?
Yeah, so Vote for Murder was based on Clue and the source material. Source material is really big, y'all, in creating immersive theater. I don't feel that it's very effective to just completely start from scratch and just start writing stuff, because you're world building. You're not just not writing a scene on the stage. You're creating a world, and within building that world, you need to find things that people are already going to click for them, things that people are familiar with, things that will subconsciously tell people, oh, this is where we are, this is what we're doing. So finding your source material, I think, is incredibly important. Even if the audience doesn't actually know what it is, that's fine, but it still helps you build that world and build those shows. Like in Unreal City, it was The Wasteland and T.S. Eliot and Shakespeare and all that stuff. But for Murder, it was Clue and the theater game Mafia. Do you all know Mafia, the old theater game? Because it was Clue and Mafia were the main source material for Vote for Murder, and so that was was a big school election. And so these things are also really fun, because one of the really great things about the Fringe is you have these months of weeks at least, of networking and social things that you're doing. So when you have these kind of shows, you get to start your shows in all those things. My actor, some of them probably hate me for it, but we will send everyone into, you will go in full character and in all your stuff to these events, and that's a great way just for marketing alone. But for this show, people would be there. We had buttons for everybody. All the students were campaigning, and the teachers were advocating for people, so they'd be out, campaigning to vote for me. It was a very easy show to like pre-market and get engaged in the community before that. And so when you got to the show, it was the school election. The opening, like while people were entering, was just all the characters were out there meeting, chatting, mingling, and then it was time for the election. You got the Principal Wadsworth called everyone into the auditorium. Yeah, the characters were like Serena Scarlett and PJ Plum and Mortimer Mustard. Like it was very based on Clue. We had, I think it was 15 people in this one. So it was like six students, 6 teachers, the principal, the secretary. I think that was about it. And so they got brought to the auditorium. This was a space that isn't around anymore, right?
The arena stage is still, it's just not always a Fringe venue. So
but it is still a theater? I thought someone tore it apart. No?
And then like it was being rented. Here's the thing. It's Hollywood and theaters come back from the dead all the time. I am sure that when we have our venue panel, we'll like announce which ones are like officially registered with us, but there's also just so many theaters that are...
Because you guys came and won, right? Didn't you win when you came? Or was that Lois and Ben?
That was Lois and Ben and everybody. I didn't come that time. I did go to... I think I only went to that and then your Gatsby show. Mm-hmm. And I think just kind of touching in on this, I want to really quickly ask another question and get some thoughts. So you have these games, you have these like immersive pieces that are not built around games, but are more built around like world building and story and experience. How do you determine which one yours is? And is there formulas? Is this something like in a typical play, you kind of have these formulaic things that people have done? What do you do when you're first starting out and you're kind of deciding what your story should be? How did you decide?
Can I really quick just tell them how that turned into a game? Because I didn't actually So after the but just so after they had the election thing, and during this was the only scripted part of that was the beginning and the end, and so this was scripted. And so during this on stage, you'd meet all the candidates, and then you'd find out that one of the candidates had been murdered, and so you immediately everyone, and when you checked in, you were already assigned a team which was connected to one of the actors. And so everyone broke apart, got with their actor that was, guiding their team. You got this big old binder, which was set up just like Clue, where you had to collect weapons, location, all that stuff. And then this was a 90-minute thing, I think, total, including the scripted scene. So I think you had an hour then to go and all the actors spread out. Everyone had a space, had a place where they were, and the actors built all their own puzzles. So this wasn't script devising, but this was game devising. So this was on this rehearsal process, Tiffany worked with all of them to create their own games, their puzzles that would all build into these, the answers to the mystery. And so you had an hour to go around with your group, running around, trying to solve puzzles, figure it all out. And then the end, you were brought in, and a rep from each person was brought up and able to say if you got it or not. And it also changed who was killed every night. The actors wouldn't. Oh, that was the mafia element. So the principal would pull the leader of each team in like every 15 minutes or something, and they got to choose who was going to be killed next. And so it would go on the loudspeaker that like, Doc Brown has been killed, and that actor would get a text and he'd have to just like get out of it and move on, know that he was dead. So that changed every night. The actors never knew who would be killed.
How'd you decide to make that one a game? Did you go in knowing it was going to be a game, or did the game come from?
No, I think that was very much built to be
a game.
That was because it was built on Clue and Mafia are games. So our source material was very much game.
What about with
driven.
your other pieces? Did you decide that they were going to be like these kind of different styles?
Yeah.
Before.
I think all of them. The concepts are when myself and my creative partner figure out what we're doing. It's usually clear from the concept what type of show it is. I think that the mechanics are the biggest part of immersive theater. Is what are your mechanics, and they can again be a million different things. But knowing what those. You may not know exactly what they are. Yeah. Like for Unreal City, so I love a flow chart. Unreal City is one of those flow charty type shows, so you might start that one. We had to really build the flow chart as we went, but we knew it was going to be. Yeah. We knew the general idea. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you all? How did you decide what type of immersive work you're going to do with not even just your Fringe shows, but you have done big ensemble work as well as these one-on-ones?
Yeah, I think we we start with sort of like the genre and the world, the type of world. We don't really adapt other source material in general. We did one experience during the pandemic that was based on like the world of Robin Hood, but heavily altered from it and everything. I think in general, it's like for us, like source material just means kind of like a touchstone of like what the spark of it is for us. But like, I guess like personally as an audience member, I like oftentimes my least favorite shows are immersive shows that are specifically adapted from another type of property, because I feel like oftentimes those properties just aren't conducive to it. And in the same way that like, adapting a video game into a movie doesn't always work, or adapting, a book into a movie doesn't always work. It's like a lot of times something is best suited for like the medium that it was actually created for. And like, I mean, one of my favorite immersive shows is Then She Fell, which is based on Alice in Wonderland. You're talking about Unreal City, which is based on T.S. Eliot. Like those, I think those are examples of things where like the source material is very kind of, it's both, it's familiar, but it's also like kind of nebulous enough that you can draw a lot of things from it. Like I think taking, a more specific thing that you would have a lot more specific like story expectations for, has a lot more pitfalls, because either people are going to sort of expect very specific things that you can either deliver or not deliver in the immersive setting, or they're just going to realize like, well, this is, like, if I want to see Hamlet, actually the best way to experience it is just as an audience member watching the story play out. Mm. And if suddenly like the way to translate that into immersive is like, I'm standing while the guards are, over there seeing the ghost, and like, is this actually a better experience? Like, what's my role here and stuff? So I think we tend to sort of like, we think of something, we think of a world, we think of a genre, and then we think like, what would that feel like to really be in
the process
as a player?
The process is so personal too, because like every single person is coming from a really different context, like what type of work do you want to build after Fringe, I think really matters. Like, are you trying to do something that's more commercially viable? Because then you probably want to do something commercially viable for Fringe, because it's going to show off your skill set in adapting that. Do you want to be more in that like, no, for me, I'm a hipster through and through. Like, I'm always like, oh, I knew about this really underground thing, and I love that I got to like kind of see a twist on that you would have never expected in theater. And so I think it's like really building for the audience that you want to garner. Like, what work are you going to be doing after this? Making sure that you have a body of work that relates to itself, so that you can make a career out of this. Or it might just be you being like, I've always wanted to do this fucking story in an immersive setting, and I'm going to do that, And so like remembering that like Fringe has this really big rule that is like, don't be a jerk and follow our code of conduct. Otherwise, do whatever the fuck you want. Take everything that's going to be said from the next 6 months with a grain of salt, put it into the context of all that's come before it. And make sure that you're doing it genuinely for you. But yeah, what about for you, Katelyn? How do you decide if it's going to be a game, if it's going to be like what kind of structure you're going to go for?
It's less about structure, and it's more about anticipating audience behavior and their wants and desires and the expectations that they're going to have if they're told that they're going to be able to experience something, and being able to either meet them there or change their direction. So I think it's less about formula, and it's just like what setting is going to give the most back to these people that isn't I lost it.
Are there like exercises people can do to get into the minds of audience members to kind of decide how to go within the script, or how do you start to like develop those ideas, I guess?
Well, I think, everyone comes into a show with different energy, and I think a lot of us as creatives are empaths and can sense people's boundaries and what they're willing and not willing to engage with, and just respecting that on every single level, because when you do, people do meet you there and will go a little farther, versus some immersive experiences where sometimes they do push you too hard, or they ask you to do things that you weren't expected to, and that really takes people out of it. So I think the most important part to me in design is, who is this for, and how are we actually working and telling the story along with them? They're co-signing with us, and that's most important to me.
Yeah, finding your audience, finding your people. Is that gonna, and then also knowing all the type of different archetypes. Are there types of people that you like? Can you tell us about some types of people that will come into the room? What it is to be those actors? I know that all of you have experiences with that. Yeah.
Well, there's the one that I think is probably can be the most difficult, but they always do because they're the most enthusiastic. Is they come with a character themselves. And they think it belongs in this world, and they're ready to fully immerse, and they're expecting your actors to then respond to them as whether or not that necessarily goes along with the story. So then using improvisation and grounding, you have to either work around that or you just sort of have to decide if that's something you want to deal with. But again, trying to meet those people with you're enthusiastic and that's awesome. But we have very carefully curated this for you in a way that is you're going to experience the best without necessarily booming over everyone. And then, I don't know, you got wallflowers and you got puzzle solvers and you've got I'm here to dress up and drink, there's lots of
Someone
different.
dragged me through this.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't know
our
if this is
favorite
much
one.
answering your question, but everything you guys say makes me like, oh yeah, I want to add to everything you say because everything's so great.
Go.
The audience, everything she's saying is so true, and I think audience expectations are so important. Whether it's how you develop the piece or just how you market the thing. A lot of people are not so much anymore, but especially in the first few years, are hate immersive theater, terrified of pieces, oh, I hate doing that. And it's because there's a lot of bad immersive theater.
There's so much.
And to me, the biggest thing for bad immersive theater is when I'm you come on up here, come here, we're gonna do something. And it's what did I do to make you think that I want to be there? You should never be making people do stuff. That's that audience agency thing again. And it's figuring out whether it's literally volunteers or whether I'm huge on audience factions. I love using audience factions, which means that audience is, and even more basic than that is the role of the audience, which you were talking about earlier. I think everything immersive, the audience needs to have a role. Even if you're just sitting in the audience, who are you? Why are you in this world? Are you a physics who are you in this world? Are you at the student election? Are you, and so knowing who you are as audience gives you an immediate connection to what's happening and allows the actors and all that to connect with your audience. But then the factions can take that a step further if you want to really engage audience in different ways. So in Unreal City, there were 4 factions. And what it was is where you came from, these made up, cities or worlds or something, which is where you came from. And everyone got in their registration, got a survey, it was a personality test basically. And so you fill out this survey and that would tell us how much you want to engage, how are you artsy? Are you a fighter? What's your MO?
Surveys are great for
surveys are really good to
for
set up
sure.
your audience. And so then we would assign. So then when they signed up, they got their little button that said what world where they were from, and that let audience know let our actors know how to engage with them. You immediately know, oh, there's someone who wants to be involved, or there's So audience factions are really great. One, to give audience a really unique a way to experience it, but also to let your actors know how to safely and appropriately interact with all of your with the audience. Those
Totally.
audience,
And the thing you were saying about how things that make audience members feel pressured versus feel encouraged, there's, if you've learned any improv, there's 2 principles that they talk about in improv, and one is gift giving, which is good improv, and that means if I was bringing you into a scene and I was hey Kristen, could you you're about to meet my parents. Could you stop thinking that everyone you meet is a mouse? That is really tough. And then if I tell you that, you're oh, great. I have just been told what to do, versus the opposite is called pimping, which would be, Kristen, you're an expert physicist. What can you tell us about particle physics? And so one is great to do for an audience member and one is not. And I think even if you're, and then whether you're dealing with a wallflower or someone who's really energized, that kind of gift giving type of interaction with an audience member can help them guide them in the right direction, I think.
This is so great. We're going to get back to structure in a little bit, so don't worry, we're not done talking about structure. But let's talk about that for a second. What are the types of, how does the language that you use in immersive theater different than a traditional playwriting where you're just writing a script? How are you developing that language? I heard a lot of devising is being done. Can we define what that is and when people are brought in and when people are brought into that process?
I have an answer to that. So because we had one of our shows, Welcome to the Neighborhood, which was it was the last one, actually. It was a barbecue. It was a full-on barbecue. We did the food and everything. And it was at the Cole, which was the most not this year, but the recent Fringe Central. We used that both for Gatsby and for Welcome to the Neighborhood. And so we had it was a barbecue. And so you got there, and that was the kind of thing where there was like a dozen people in that one, and they were all scripted scenes, but we're in one space that wasn't much bigger, honestly, than this entire theater, really, that courtyard, and there were scenes happening everywhere. And so that was super problematic, how that was written. We worked with a writer on that who we hadn't worked with before, and he was very stubborn about how he was going to write this thing. And he wrote these scenes, which were much more like traditional theater scenes, and they were meant to, well, when this happens, this person comes up and da-da-da. But that's not realistic because of audience engagement, because of timing, because of environmental effects, all the things, you need to have freedom in that space to play. Again, depending on what the piece is, but in this kind of in that kind of show where I might be here having a scene with you guys, and then that another actor is supposed to storm in and like break it up because they just had they just got some information that made them here. There can't be this specific moment that they cut you off, because it's never going to happen. It's going to be very awkward and uncomfortably challenging. You need to have that sort of free space in that where there's a allowance for time differentiation, you know what I mean, without just waiting for that cue. Does that make sense?
Totally.
It's a specific answer to that, but that was a case where that was very clear why that's a problem.
I will say we have tried to do that, and actually I think sometimes succeeded of like making something happen. But the thing is, you need so much communication of like, and I mean, and one thing we did in both Safe House shows was we had everything cued to music, which was easy because we had just like a stereo playing the whole time. So it was like, okay, this song comes on, we know that this scene is about to happen, we know that someone needs to be over here. Like literally at this point in the song is when someone's gonna like burst in and stuff like that. And
it's different for Fringe, right? So like you might not be able to guarantee that you would be able to have a house like that for Fringe unless it was in the Fringe zone. And so you might want to scale it to maybe be that specific rather than writing it for Fringe where things are so much more unpredictable.
Music and sound is a great way to a great tool for your actors to work off of in a piece, because there's no scene's down, lights up, next scene, it's all happening. So it's having a consistent soundscape, or like in the Neighborhood, it was music, because it was, we had radios and we had multiple speakers, and so it's hard to be very precise, but it was definitely how people knew that the actors all knew, we're at this big point where something big is going to happen, that kind of thing. Have anyone seen Sleep No More? Famous Sleep No More? That's all built off of soundscape. That's how all those you wouldn't know, never would you know that as an audience member, because it's very subtle, but that's how all those actors do all their timing, all the shifts. It's all based on soundscape, and it's a really good way to, you literally you hit go, the show starts, and it's one track that goes all the way through the show, and that's how everything stays together.
Love it. I want to focus on one piece each really quick to answer this next set of questions, which is just to kind of understand how to get started. So if you don't mind focusing on a game type show, and you talking more about that one-on-one immersive with the pod, and you more of like that safe house kind of open style interactive space, where do you get started? I'm sitting here, I have this idea to do either a game or a one-to-one kind of interaction, or this kind of more open world exploring type show. How did you get started devising that piece, working with people? When were people brought into that production process? And could you give us just kind of a rundown of page to that first show?
Yeah. Well, Safe House 77, which was the very first immersive show that I created, and the first time I worked with Katelyn, that was, I was really lucky in that I worked with really supportive people. I worked with an amazing cast. And they were all patient with me for coming in with not at all a fully baked idea when I brought actors in, but saying I have this concept. I think it's really cool. I'm going to be figuring some of it out as we go. But by the time I brought in actors, I had already been fiddling with the story and characters and general setting for several months. And what it was is it was the elevator pitch for Safe House 77 is it was a cross between a 70s LA house party and a spy thriller. So you're invited to this house an actual house in Los Feliz. It's this woman's house. She's having a party to gain support for the Equal Rights Amendment. And then and 10 audience members come in. They're the party guests. And then these other guests arrive who turn out to be spies. And there turns out to be this other spy story that the audience members are brought in and everything. And so I had like the basics of that when I brought actors in, but I didn't have a lot of specifics about like how we're going to go from like this part of the story to this part of the story, or like, specifically what a lot of the actual individual scenes were going to look like, or what a scene even counts as when you're in a house.
Yeah.
So
And, or how to end it, which was one of the most terrifying things. But basically what I did is I just spent a lot of time, because I didn't like have a script to just hand them. I had sort of like a pitch document that everyone read. And then we just sort of like, I told everyone some like music and shows and movies to see for sort of like getting into the vibe. And then like the first several rehearsals were just us sitting around talking about like, I mean, I had cast them in as the characters, so we knew which characters they were all playing, but like we just talked a lot about like, hey, this is, it was the 70s. These characters are sort of based on members of Fleetwood Mac. We can talk about that. We can talk about spy stuff. We can just talk about like, what do we like in immersive shows like this and everything. And then over time, I started writing scenes, and then we'd rehearse those scenes and then be like, I don't know if this is how this show should work. Threw a lot of things out. And then finally, but being able to work with actors for that long and, like have them kind of like find the characters at the same time, by the time I had to just buckle down and like write a full script, it was so much easier to do that and be like, okay, I know Katelyn can do this and I know other people can do that and everything. And then in terms of what the script actually looked like, it was because it's basically like, going back to what I said in the beginning, you're not just scripting the show, you're scripting everything that everyone is doing. So we had basically one script that was just a description of everything that's physically happening, and like, this is what's happening in this room, and this is who is here, and this is how long it takes, like this is timed out, so like literally like 7 o'clock to 7:13 it's this, and we basically timed, I mean, you can't necessarily time it out, but it's like, again, if we have the songs playing, if this song ends, you got to move on to the next thing. Even if you're in the middle of a sentence, you kind of wrap it up. And so that would, show how everything moved along, how the actors moved from one place to another. And then everything in that would refer to like, okay, now this scene happens. And then you go into the dialogue script and there's, a dialogue scene written of what the actor is going to say. If it's a one-on-one scene where just the actor is talking, then it's basically written as a monologue, but it's written and rehearsed with the idea that the monologue would be interrupted, that they would be asking questions to audience members, stuff like that. If it's a scene between characters that audience members are more observing, then it's written like that, but again, also with the understanding that it's going to be interrupted and everything like that. And then this whole giant document with all these things gets, that becomes the show. And I mean, more or less that for live shows, at least, that's still how we've done it.
Once you have that script, are you ready to like do test audiences? Is there such thing as a tech rehearsal? Like, what's your rehearsal process look like after that?
I mean, test audiences are so important, and honestly, that's one thing to just like swallow your ego about, because you need to bring audiences in. And in my opinion, you need to bring an audience in from the moment you possibly can. Like, and obviously not like a paying audience where you're like, here's our show, but like just a group of people who don't know what the thing is, who you can like because that's really the only way you can actually rehearse an immersive show in a lot of cases is with a bunch of people who don't necessarily know what's going to happen and are the right number of people for interacting with and everything. And you just have to see how it goes, because a lot of times it doesn't make sense to like cement it too much before you do that, because you'll instantly see that like, oh, a lot of these things are not working at all, or or even like this space doesn't work at all. I mean, we tried to do a show in a bar one time, and it was like the level of noise in the bar is too high for anyone to hear the dialogue, so we have to change what we're doing. And so just things like I mean, it's crazy.
Did you do any tech rehearsals, or was that kind of just a part of the rehearsal process to incorporate tech throughout?
My immersive shows have barely had tech. They're usually out, aside from that soundscape, which was just for just for Welcome to the Neighborhood. Gatsby was live musicians, but that was it as far as tech. There were scene changes and such for that because we're moving through the spaces. But yeah, I haven't done. But in like, if you want to go to a much larger scale show, like I meant to say this too about the commercial thing before too. If I can sidebar on that really quick. So like. Fringe is a great, like Alan was saying, a great opportunity to where you can do whatever you want, right? Because you have such a willing audience who wants to come see your weird shit and wants to come do stuff they've never done before. And so like, it's a great opportunity to do stuff that would never survive in like the commercial, in the real world. But if you want to, and like, but if you want to do, if you see what the big stuff, me and this Beetlejuice thing I did, like that's, if you want to take it to the next scale and make money from it, you know, swallow your artistic ego and do some commercial shit, because that is what people love doing that stuff. All this stuff I've done for Fever is immersive, but you know, it's not nearly as cool as any of this shit we're talking about, right? It's much easier. It's much more, it's for people who've never done any of this stuff before, audience wise. But if you want to scale stuff larger, sadly, that is the way to do it, and that's how you can get really large audiences in, is with the commercial and the obvious source material and all that kind of stuff. So when you're doing something big like that, and you do have full tech, and you're in a space, yes, you totally do. Like when I've done those, like those kind of projects, you do a traditional Q to Q, but it's often like you're often in. It's not a theater, right? So we'll take, and I'm like both those projects, the John Wick and Beetlejuice, was many different spaces in the venues. So you just kind of walk it through. You do tech, you go to one space and you tech that space with the actor, and then you move to the next space. But it's not like things aren't linear often in immersive, or even if they're narratively linear, they may not be linear like how you would walk through them, or you know. So I think it's just really depends on the show. But if you have tech elements, don't think that it has to be the same as with a traditional theater show. Treat each space separately, tech each space separately, and then put it all together.
Tell me how you made a script for a game. Like, how do you make, if you have a game that you want to do, what does that
So it wasn't
look like?
scripted. It wasn't really scripted except for the beginning. And like I wrote, I think, the beginning and the end scene, and that was one of the last things we did. Did that we got to write this opening. What are we going to do? Like that was very much an end kind of thing, because for that show, it wasn't the biggest. It was very much it was just the color. It wasn't the main part of the show. So I'll say for all of so my partner Tiffany is like, she's a dramaturg. She's very like schooled in this stuff. So we have a lot of like, you know, a lot of structured ways that we kind of create these things. And so she has a lot of games in her wheelhouse that we do with actors. And this kind of depends, regardless of what the show is, our rehearsals are a lot of hours of sitting and essentially very involved improv games. And that's how everyone's building their characters. I can't think of what the name of this game is that she always does, but it's, you know, games where you're assigning yourselves all the parts of a character. You're building all these things about character. You're creating relationships with other people. You're figuring out what has happened to you in your life. Like it's just building all that color so that you know as much. It's the thing that as an actor you would do, building backstory on your own. But in immersive we do it as a group, and we do it all together so that everyone's building the world. We have to make sure we're all living in the same world. We all know the same facts about the world. We know the same facts about each other. So while we're creating and devising all those things, I think doing it as a group is very, very important. And so we've always.
Did you document that somehow through like spreadsheets, or through like how is the documentation to share information between your cast?
Yeah, I think it depends. This is Tiffany's job. She manages these things. But there's like, whether it's binders or we've got a lot of giant notepads, and it's a lot of writing on big notepads. And like for Unreal City, I remember we had so many giant notepads because we just sit and talk and you just write stuff. Yeah. I think that, you know, what if this happened? Love it. Great. Like it's a lot of just like building, you know, and it is from scratch, but that's why I think the source material helps too, because then you're starting with something. Like you said, something based on Fleetwood Mac characters. So if you have something that your character is based on, it's just a starting point. And then the world's your oyster and you can go wherever you want, but it gives you like a starting point that everyone understands. We all know that this is what this is to begin with, because we're all familiar with that. And then we can grow it and build it kind of off of that.
What does it look like to script a one-to-one interaction? A one-to-one that is so based in conversation.
Well, it's much more about the interpersonal relationship and what audience members that I feel are wanting, and that is to be seen and to be witnessed as they are, where they are, and how they're experiencing it. So anticipating that, again, you're not there to monologue and jack off to the story that you made. It is about them and connecting and what stories you can tell by them emotionally participating and what you're giving. So for the pod, for example, so you're on the abbreviated simulation, you're jumping years, but like, how has your relationship grown? So relating to like how living with a roommate for a while, what things would come up? What would you want to talk about? What would you hold them accountable for? What would they hold you accountable for? Just really trying to play with and anticipate. And again, you always get surprised. Whew, always get surprised with what people want to say. But mostly it is about just seeing them and letting them know that without them, you don't exist.
Yeah.
And how important they are.
Yeah, and I mean to like clarify that a little bit, like the dialogue in the pod was all scripted, and Katelyn was on, like, word for word on script, I would say like 99% of the time.
Thank you.
It's just, I mean, not that you were like, forget it. I mean, just like having to actually, change what you were saying based on what the audience member was doing. I think, so it's like, I think what you're able to do is it's like, and I mean, that's already baked into the writing process, I think, because we were writing the pod together and you knew that you would be doing this and you would be needing to actually connect with the audience member while you were doing it. So we wrote dialogue together that made sense with that, but like, but it's basically like you delivering the same passages of dialogue every time for every different audience member, but energetically being able to, connect to them in, whatever nuanced way they need to be. And then actually, like, I mean, that was the amazing thing about that we discovered about it was, like Katelyn said, it had to be exactly 20 minutes. We had to like get another person in, and you would think that there would be so many possible variations in terms of like, well, would the scene take longer or not take longer? But I think like energetically, the way that Katelyn was able to connect to each audience member and kind of put them in the emotional position that we wanted them to be in, so that they really bought into it and they really sort of accepted that reality, and they accepted their role as, both supporting this AI character and being supported by her. It was like everyone's unwittingly, all these audience members sort of did follow the script that we wanted them to, more or less, and yet all felt like they had their individual experience, and I give full credit to Katelyn.
But we did modify it.
That.
Like, we had a survey, so we actually had multiple different scenes that we would swap in and out depending on the audience member and what they wanted. So automatically we were adjusting to your personality, what you think we would enjoy or what would be tasty.
Did some of these like kind of like feeling out how you would say a line, or feeling that line could be said in multiple ways, did that come from like the test audience time period? Or most of it
again
was,
you can't, like, you cannot rehearse without people because you just don't know how it's gonna go, and it's just, you can try. But
what so as soon as possible, but like what does it mean to have a test audience person, and can you do test audiences without being in the physical space that you're going to be in?
So we test. You completely agree. There's nothing more important than having your test audiences in there. And I think depending on the piece, again, as soon as possible as you need it. If it's a super interactive, piece where the actors are one-on-one with audience, like, how can you really rehearse that without having your audience in there? We tend to do like scheduled test audience days. It depends on your audience size as well. When you have larger audience sizes, obviously it's harder to get that many people to come in and test. I think having just your partners, your best friends, whatever, coming in early and be like, can you just come to this rehearsal and just like be a person there for us is super, super great. And that, I think starting that way is good, and then building to where you have a full. So like if we schedule 3 days of test runs, official test runs, like before opening, the first one will be like, a quarter house, a quarter of your audience. You'll only go in, let's say it's a show that loops over and over. Let's say it's a show that loops 4 times. You do your first one just going 1 time through the show with like quarter house, right? Your second time you do a full house 1 time. And then the third time is real life, right? You do you do it like it's an actual performance night. You do all 4 loops. You try to do full house. So I think like building, you start small where it's the first time is just about people who are there for the actors to use. And then you build so that your final test run should be completely replicating what the show will be. So the actors know what that turnover is, what the timing feels like, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely different ways where, I think bringing in a test audience super early, or even, like you said, just having a certain number of people able to come to rehearsal to be, audience guinea pigs or whatever, that's where you're still, things might or might not work. And then there's the later stage where it's like, okay, we think the show is working the way we want it to. So now we're going to bring in a test audience to see, if there are still kinks to work out and stuff like that. And that's a different phase.
And a great, cheat, depending on how your show is structured, is being able to have actors do that for each other. So like in a piece like Vote for Murder or Unreal, any of these where there's individual scenes. If it's one big thing and all the actors are in it together, then obviously that doesn't really work. But most immersive is probably going to be broken down more than that, where you have individual pieces. So then you break those down and the other actors or audience to work on that. So Vote for Murder, when they have their puzzles, you get everyone else comes in, and today's rehearsal is about these 3 characters. The first hour we're working with them, second hour with them, third with them, and everyone is audience and gets to just let that actor play. So using your actors as your initial test audience is
such a good
point. And I think it really helps, like it helps actors understand the other pieces of the show that aren't theirs.
Yes.
I think it even helps them just be supportive and understand, like, oh, I'm not carrying this entire show. Like there are, these other things are important too, and it's good for, me to, but yeah. And then just seeing how, whether you're an actor or whether you're the, writer or director or whatever, like, yeah, seeing how it feels as an audience member to receive, this part of the show is super valuable.
We have about 20 more minutes, and I have some more questions. But first, I want to open it up. Is there any burning questions in the audience? Anything that you'd want to ask anybody? Yes, Will. I want to come up.
Yay, Will.
Hi, Will.
I'm Will, he, him. The show I'm working on is called Audition, the musical, an immersive experience. But you guys mentioned collecting information, surveys, and I was wondering if you had any advice as to like when the best time to, and if you had any tools as to like how to efficiently and easily collect info from the audience, because sometimes people are like, a QR code? I don't know. Or,
Google Forms.
Yeah. But also, like, to that point, when you submit this survey, is the time sensitivity is key, I think, in any other form, because you have their attention for this much time. They're going to move on to another thing. So you almost want to get them involved and enrolled almost way closer to the actual performance, because that's already putting them in the headspace for what they're about to experience. If there is too much gap, people will forget and like, what did I sign or what did I do? So I think as if you want that information ahead of time, I think there's different methods for that. But if you want them to really zone in on what they're going to be playing as or participating, like keeping it as close to the performance so it's all encapsulated and they get every little morsel of what you want to give them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even though we've been talking about the importance of like all the information and world building and rules and stuff that you can provide in advance, the better. But then also, unfortunately, you do have to structure it so that if they ignore all of that, if none of that gets seen, or if they don't fill out the survey or whatever, and they show up to the show not having done any of that you can still accomplish what you need to.
It's called the outside world stuff. So anything that happens outside of your show is your outside world, and you can have so much fun with it. But exactly that, it can't be a detrimental part of the experience because not everyone will do it. ideally you get everyone's email. As back to your question on just how do you get it out there. Ideally, your ticketing system collects emails.
Which is the case in the Fringe. You can use the Fringe site to message your patrons.
But the problem, like let's say someone buys 4 tickets, right? How do you get those other people? So it's never perfect. It's completely imperfect. But figure out a way. But if possible, like maybe when they buy your ticket, can you ask for the other attendees' emails, or can you reach out? Figure out how you can get as many emails as possible. And then I completely agree with it needing to build up. I like to do a tiered outside world stuff. So if you buy your tickets 2 weeks in advance, there might be 3 different stages of outside world material that you get. But if you buy your ticket the day before, you're only going to get that last one. But so, for Unreal City, for as soon as you buy a ticket, it's congratulations, you are a lottery winner. You have been chosen to come visit Unreal City. We can't whatever. So it's anything that tells you are going to be in this world now. If it's Gatsby, you got a letter from Nick or from I don't remember what the letter was, but you get a letter from one of them inviting you to this dinner. And so I think as soon as you buy a ticket, it's great to have something that goes out as soon as you buy a ticket, but then stagger it out based on how early in advance they are, so that they're also, you don't want to send them something 2 weeks before the show and then that's it, because they'll forget.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're going to forget all this, don't worry. We do more immersive panels, and we have so many like really in-depth production ones as well, that are recorded and online as well. If you want to go back and like be able to be like, what do I need to prepare when I'm like a month ahead? You know what I mean? A month from tickets going on sale. Is there any more burning questions? Oh, okay. Yeah. This whole side.
Problem aisle. Classic problem aisle. Hi, I'm Charlotte. Hello,
Hey, Charlotte.
greetings. Hello. I'm working on a immersive archaeological dig. It's sort of like an ideological dig. And my question is, what have y'all learned, or what comes to mind, or heart, or whatever, in terms of like one-on-one versus the chemistry of a group experiencing something, and the kind of pat your head, rub your belly weirdness, but possibilities of audience participating versus, I'm not sure if these are separate, versus taking in, right? So like audiencing while also me now part of this. Like, does that question make any sense? Like, do you find that those things sometimes make it like hard to like, it's like hard to like cry while eating, or maybe it's not, but like, are there certain things that are sort of hard to, or maybe we all do it all the time, but are there certain things that you find in immersive theater that are hard asks of an audience, or do you find that it's a lot more fluid? And those are 2 things that come to mind for me. One-on-one, is there some kind of group something that you're trying to, a chemistry of communitas that you're at some point in the show wanting to create? And also, like, are there some asks that feel difficult for an audience receiving versus participating? Does that?
I'm going to let them answer first. Ellen, don't hate me. I have to run to the bathroom.
Yeah,
I'll be right back.
Go.
I think that's a great question, and honestly, that encapsulates, I think, a lot of what we. I mean, that's a lot of what the work is basically is because there are ideal immersive audiences, and you will get them sometimes, but not all the time. Like I would always say, like sometimes the audience is with us, and sometimes we have to wrestle them. But like, I mean, what like starting with what you said first about like, one-on-one versus a group setting. Like if you have an actor doing a scene for one person, there's a lot of chance for that actor to structure it to that person, whatever energy they're giving off, so that they get the scene, that they get the information, everything like that. If they're doing it for a group and, some people in the group are really attentive and into it, and one person is being a clown and one person is being this and everything, like that does make it harder. It doesn't make it impossible, but it just changes the way you need to kind of, structure that. And I think in terms of like what is easy for an audience and what is hard, it's easy for audiences to play along. If you give them a vibe to play along with, that's easy. What becomes hard is when you need them to take in specific information. And I mean, as a writer, as someone with like a screenwriting background, exposition is always one of the hardest and most annoying and most important things. And in immersive, it's even harder because if you're trying to deliver exposition in a scene, in an interactive scene where an audience member isn't just sitting watching a screen, but they're like picking this thing up and having a drink and everything like that, it's like, then you kind of get into like the principles they talk about in advertising, where it's like, you need to repeat it 6 times so that they know what it is. So, and then it's sort of like picking your battles of like, okay, in this scene, like, let's say this is, we're bringing them into this archaeological dig and we want to tell them, what, I'm sure this is already wrong because you said it's more metaphorical, but if you're talking about like what fossil we're looking for, like you can communicate maybe 1 or 2 important things about that. But if you try to communicate a bunch of things, and even though it's like very clear in the dialogue when you're looking at it, you have to understand that they're not necessarily going to take that in. Even if they're engaged in the show, they might just be engaged in the show itself and the vibe and everything, but like then trying to get them to like download all that information is like actually competing with that. So it's like those are the things you have to do, and again that brings it back to kind of test audiences where you can just be like, did any of that stick with you? Did you did that work?
Yeah, I think picking your moments, and you're always going to have more control in smaller scenes, and the actor's going to be able to adhere to that. I think when you are choosing your bigger group scenes, knowing that everyone's attention is going to be distracted. Yeah, picking the point where like this is happening, and I think those need to be choreographed, but also scripted in a way that understands that and holds weight for those possibilities happening. Like for Safe House 77, we did a group game in the middle of the party where it was Never Have I Ever, and we went around the circle, but we had like key expositions of characters then pointing, being like, have you ever, and using that as exposition. So it was using the setting, the scene, everything that we were doing to control, and then it evolved in a big fight that we had to like really choreograph, but just, choosing carefully, but yeah.
Hi, I'm Xander.
Hi. Oh my gosh.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I know. I missed the mask.
I do love chameleon it up. I am remounting my immersive one-on-one complaint appointments with the supervisor show from the Complaints Department universe, and I'm also going to be performing a new show called Miss Patty Cake's Hotline for the Curious Mind.
Ooh.
I mean, I have so many questions to chat with you all offline and everything, but I had a particular question for Kristen. It seemed so wild, some of the outdoor activities and scenarios with Unreal City. I was wondering if there was any talks with law enforcement about things that were going to be going
That's a good question.
down, if there were any incidents of just bystanders, like what's happening.
I was starting to tell a story earlier, and I think I got sidetracked, so that's a really great. Sorry, did I cut you off? Is that the end of your question? Okay, yeah. I got excited. First of all, we learned so much in Unreal City. We had there were definitely challenges. Outdoor is great for so many reasons, but it's also very challenging for a lot of reasons because you have a completely unpredictable environment, whether that's noise, people, all the things. So you have to make sure that you're down to, to go with that as it's going to happen. So we had a couple of different characters who were playing homeless folks, and we definitely had issues with one of them. So we had security, but there weren't like real security. We had volunteer security, like Matt Ritchie did security for us. Nice. I know. And like, it was, we had people posted up. I spent the entire show. I never actually got to experience the entire show. I never got to see the end of the show because I lived on a street corner at Cole and Santa Monica with a headset. Half the actors had headsets in because I would be cueing people. So I'd see, I was there when I'd watch a group come around the corner, would be go for the tent, would be, they would let me know groups gone from the tent. Okay, go stairwell, whatever. Like it was all about like cueing stuff. And so we had security placed, appropriately based on the pathways. And we definitely had that one actor, Cyan, maybe know, wonderful actor Cyan, played a roaming homeless person. We had Carl, who was in a tent. We literally pitched a tent every night, right down on Lillian. And he had his huge tent, and groups would come in and out of the tent. And he was cool. But Cyan, who was a wandering homeless character, definitely got. I think someone tried to like pee on her one day, and like we had some issues. So she was very closely watched with security. But in hindsight, like it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. Like it was definitely a learning lesson as far as like the control that we had in those outdoor environments. There's a great story where one night a group came out of the finale. They exited the experience, which ended at Vine Street at the school, which there, because that's a government building, that was a very formal, like dealt with, the city and got permission to use that location. We didn't do law enforcement, but we worked with the school. But when the group came out of the school, there was a homeless person doing a thing, and they all thought it was part of the show, and they all like hung out and watched this guy for a while until one of them was like, I don't think this is part of the show. Oh my God. So yes, there's a lot of challenges to outdoors. Really think about what your environments are. Think about what world you're putting your actors in. Safety is so important for your actors and for your audience, right? So yes, challenges for sure.
But did you need to alert law enforcement about like it was just in the moment? And then did you need permits for the tent?
I also want to say that our rules have changed since the show was done. So I wanted to also really quickly say that show was done in 2018, and that was really the beginning of Immersive, and we didn't really have protocols as Hollywood Fringe as to like what that was going to look like.
You shouldn't do?
And now we have much more processes of like site visits, and we have to see the space and help you think through some of these problems before you've thought through it yourself. So if you're trying to do stuff in that way, I just don't want to get too in the weeds of it because there is more processes through Hollywood Fringe now. And especially when it comes to insurance. Insurance is the most major one that we have to deal with and make sure that, so it is a little bit harder. It will be much more expensive to do something like that now because it's not cutting edge anymore. It's not something that we would never, we have these things.
I'll also say, like, Unreal City was not a cheap show. Like, it seems like, we don't rent a theater, great. But instead we got the school, we did Space Station Casting Center, we did Lala, we used like 4 or 5 indoor locations, which all cost us money. So it was not in theory, it was like, great, we don't need to rent a theater, but we rented like 5 other spaces. So it was definitely keep that in mind too. It seems like it's like a great idea to not have a theater, but it depends what other spaces, you need.
And when it comes to permitting, we will have a site-specific workshop specifically about permitting and that sort of thing, which is in the spring. And that's when you're going to have to make sure that you make those decisions because some of it you can't apply to so in advance. So you don't really got to think about that now. But if you are planning to do site-specific work, we have a specific panel.
And I was just gonna say the permitting thing. Permitting is so hard in this world, and it's really interesting to hear. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing with permitting, because I was going to say at the Fringe you don't really have to worry about it because it's small, because you're very small scale in theory, like, it's small scale, so you don't feel like you necessarily have to. So I'm super excited to hear what y'all are putting together for that. In the much larger world, in the bigger commercial scope that I work in, permitting is a nightmare because it's all new, and so there's a lot of standards that cities have. And this isn't one of them yet. So the cities are working.
LA is not a friendly city.
No, LA is really very, very challenging.
It's not very good with that kind of thing. But you can perform on the street.
But it's changing a lot because of groups like Fever and huge companies that are making all this stuff happening more. There is becoming a lot more access to permitting stuff, but that's on a larger scale.
Our also number one thought is don't permit if you don't have to, and actually work with people. That's kind of what I was saying. Yeah, work with people in these different areas that have permission to use these spaces. So instead of using an abandoned alleyway, but if there's a venue near us that actually has space that gives that same feeling, like a hallway versus an alleyway. There's lots of these different spaces, like even in this building, you would be surprised. There's a whole little downstairs area that, there's these ways that you can do these things without having to permit, but outside you do need a permit, and we will help point you in the pathways of what you need to do, but it is more difficult.
We also kept people moving. All of our outdoor stuff was pretty much moving. The alleyway was one thing, but that was like 3 audience at a time and 2 actors. It was very small. So we never had like a giant 30 audience standing in a space outside. Like that, it was always either contained with big groups or it was small mobile groups if it was outdoors.
Do we have more questions? Anybody? Any questions? I have more. Do you have a specific one you want to ask really quick, Xander?
If there's time, I want to let. No, I mean if there's time, I'll let you ask your stuff. I can always ask.
Yeah. Okay, we have about 5 minutes, and what I would really love to talk about is okay.
here we go. The elements in your script that you need to figure out while you're going through this, whether that's like safety things that you need to start thinking about, like as you're writing, audience interaction as you're writing. What are the sort of things that people can put together before they are bringing this to their team and saying, "Hey, we're doing this"? Like, what would your pitch deck include of the show? Does it have any of these things? Are these things you can figure out later?
I think it really depends on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it's really hard when you're developing a show, and I mean, I feel like this is true of any kind of writing, but I feel like, the earlier it is in development, the more it feels like perfect in your own head, but that's because you haven't found all the pitfalls that are out there. And if it's if it's too nascent and too like undeveloped, and you start talking to other people about it too soon, and they start poking reasonable holes in it, sometimes that can be enough to be like, I don't know if I should do this. So I feel like there's sort of like the magic amount of time to develop it, in your own head, and try to think through some of the pitfalls so that you at least have like enough sort of like armor on it, so that if someone has some challenges about it or whatever, that you're like, okay, those are legitimate. I still, I'll find ways of, around that and everything. But like, yeah, I think the earlier you can sort of like try to get other people on board, and obviously it's much better to have like a partner or someone, people that you're really close to, that you trust, and that, even if it is kind of ill-formed, that they, that they'll be like, oh, okay, great, but, what about this and that and everything, and then, but I think it's just like when you're trying
the actors and people in it, or you mean like outside people that you're pitching to?
No, I mean anyone that's like not you in your sort of immediate circle, and I think it's hard to to fully develop and everything. So it's like, well, what is what's the feel of it? What's the what's the genre? What's the kind of type of experience? How, like, I think the most basic things to have down, like roughly how many actors, how many audience, what kind of space. And then, like, what does it feel like? What is it, and from there you can let people add their own ideas if it helps. But like, I mean, I think especially the earlier, if it's one of your first immersive shows, then I would tend more to like really try to develop it out as much as possible before you're talking to other people about it, so that you don't kind of get derailed in any way.
And what timeline would that look like? What if we're trying to do a June show? When would be the earlier you'd bring on or the latest you'd bring on your collaborators? And I know that we have exceptions.
I'm like, it's
to
November.
The
People know what shows they're doing.
Yeah, right? I was like, what?
But you
what
should.
is it?
No, just
like, what is the latest you would bring on your creative partners, you think?
Oh man, and for Fringe.
I mean, the pod was easy because it was really just Katelyn and me, so we didn't really have to bring. I mean, we brought like one other person on, but
so I think it really depends on what the show is like. So we like Tiff and I really worked very much from the start together. She often is the original concept, and then we'll kind of build it out. But we get our actors involved very, very early, usually, because a lot of it is. So for me, we know what our source material is. We know what the mechanics are going to be. Is this a free roam? Is it a dark ride? Is it a choose your own adventure? Is it a game? Figure out what is going to be the mechanical structure of the piece. What is our source material? What is our cast list? And and then we start that, and then we go from there. If it's a piece like Unreal City, we probably worked with those actors for a few months because it was so devised from the ground up. When we did Gatsby, which I know I didn't have a chance to talk about at all, which is maybe my favorite, was completely scripted. It was that was about bringing the page to life, like sensory. It was a sensory experience, and we wanted to actually bring all of that descriptive and everything to life. So I built the script built directly from the text, like literally took the text and pulled stuff out and came up with what the script was going to be. That could be put together a lot faster because the actors aren't devising, because their characters are exactly what they are. That's something in theory you could rehearse and put together, in a couple of weeks if you needed to. It's a much shorter piece. The hardest thing with that one was the role. The audience role in that was the biggest part of the concept, and we didn't have that right away. That's something we didn't figure out. We knew we wanted to do Gatsby. We knew we wanted to sensory experience. We knew we wanted to do some political stuff in there, and we knew we were doing episodics. We were doing a chapter at a time, and I couldn't figure out what the audience role is. I'm like, who are they? Why are the audience at this dinner party? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And so I'm obsessed with the concept we came up with, which was that the audience role in that piece was Nick. So if you're familiar with Gatsby, so Nick, the actor Nick, narrated, was basically speaking through you, all his, because it's mostly an inner monologue anyway, that entire book, right? So he's talking through all the text, and then a Daisy would look at an audience member and say, "Oh, Nick, darling, it's so good to see you," while Nick, the actor, is speaking over your shoulder, kind of thing. So it was a really cool concept. So the hardest part of that was working with actors to get them to make that make sense, and that was just a lot of playing with them, not being able to speak to Nick and speaking with each other and like that kind of stuff. But because it was fully scripted, and everyone came in knowing their characters, knowing all that, it could happen, really in a couple weeks. I mean, it could happen very quick if you needed it to, versus something if you really want to build it with your team, if you want to start from a more blank slate, give yourself a few months.
Yes.
I could talk to them for hours, and I would if I could, because I love them all. But we gotta go. We have a 25-minute break, so if you want to go get coffee, if you want to get food, you can eat and drink in the lobby. We're gonna be in here, just hanging out. If you have questions, anything for me, Roddy, Lois, we'll all be around. We'll come back here at 2 p.m. on the dot, because we're gonna have about 20 different people who are here to have one-to-one conversations with you about your project. And so that's really a time for you to be able to talk to somebody who's done Fringe, and then you're going to go to different people. So you're going to get a couple of different people's perspectives on your project today. So it's really important to come back, be able to talk to people in that one-to-one. You'll have 5 minutes with people. And so, meet us back here at 2 on the dot. So maybe a couple minutes before that. Restrooms are in the lobby. There's a coffee shop around the corner. Eating in the lobby is totally fine. Drinking as well.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you all.
Hey, can I get a picture? Can we do a little picture?